Hey there, boils and ghouls. Welcome to this week's episode of Hollow Weekly, where George and I interview Jared Rivet. He is the screenwriter of the new release Jackals, now available on Blu-ray and DVD from Scream Factory. He is also the Dead Right Horror Trivia co-host in Burbank, also a frequent contributor to the Twilight Zone-esque audio drama anthology Earbud Theater. And make sure to subscribe to Hollow Weekly on iTunes or Stitcher or wherever you get your podcast fixed, so you don't miss out on the next episode in our How Low Can We Go series, where we take on Rotten Tomatoes by finding not fresh rated horror movies one at a time from 59% all the way down to 0 and show that they deserve a better rating. Next week's episode features 1981's Ghost Story, and if you haven't seen it yet, check out some of the images from Dick Smith's special effects makeup. If that doesn't sell you on this film, I just don't know what will. And now, on to our interview with Jared. Enjoy.
So, the first thing we wanted to know is what got you into horror as a fan?
Wow, that's a big question.
It's a thick one.
I should also kind of say, Jackals was my first produced horror screenplay, but it is easily my 39th so I've written about like 40 feature screenplays, and Jackals was the first produced one, and I wrote it 10 years ago.
Oh, wow.
So you're talking about, and lots of other material, lots of other attempts, and just trial and error and trying to get stuff going. And it's very difficult to get stuff made. It's a miracle if anything gets made. But when it comes to the horror stuff, like I actually co-host a monthly horror trivia night in Burbank called Dead Right Horror Trivia.
I get them on Facebook so many times.
I always see the deadline post.
I've been co-hosting that for the last 2 years. I used to play with a team with Brian Collins, who does Horror Movie a Day, and Sean Keller, who's a screenwriter, and a couple other guys. But we won too much, and so they broke us up, and they asked me if I wanted to host. So I became the host 2 years ago, and so we do all that stuff. So I guess the reason I'm saying all that is that I'm like, you're not talking to someone who wrote Jackals and was like, okay, that's my one horror movie, and I did that as a gateway to get into write dramas or action films or something. Like, I'm a lifer. I'm definitely a hardcore horror fan, and that's not going to change. And I everything that I've got going forward is all horror stuff as well.
That's awesome.
My parents were very, very young, and when they had me, and it was in the 70s, and there was a lot of really lax kind of attention being paid to the kinds of things that they wanted to watch versus the kind of things that I should be watching.
Mm-hmm.
And so I have this vague memory of cowering in the back seat while the car was parked at the drive-in while they were watching Halloween. And I was like 7, maybe younger, and just kind of covering my ears and hearing Carpenter's score and hearing the screaming and the breathing, the Michael Myers mask breathing, and just like creating this imagery in my head of how whatever terrifying nightmare that was creating, I wish that I could like brainstorm Strange Days, record it and put it up on a screen, because it had to be just absolutely terrifying. But I was terrified of horror movies. I was scared to death of horror movies, but I was incredibly drawn to them at the same time as a kid. Mm-hmm. I kept on wanting to watch them. And you're talking about the golden age of horror. You're talking about the late 70s. You're talking about, Halloween, Dawn of the Dead, Friday the 13th, The Fog. You're talking about this era where all of this amazing stuff, we didn't realize at the time how spoiled we were. We didn't realize that every movie wasn't going to be an American Werewolf in London. We thought that they were all this good. It was like, that's what horror movies are. And then, as you go later on, it's like, oh, really? Like this isn't, they're not all going to be fantastic. So the movie that kind of changed everything for me in terms of being terrified of and kind of cowering from, but still wanting to watch them, was Creepshow.
Oh.
Creepshow kind of taught me that, and Creepshow's tagline was, the most fun you'll ever have being scared.
Yeah.
And I saw Creepshow and was kind of surprised. Like, oh, horror can be fun? Like, that's weird. Okay. And then that was a gateway to kind of going into Romero's other stuff. So then I saw Night of the Living Dead and saw that, I'm East Coast, I'm from Massachusetts. And so there was something about the kind of weird kind of homemade East Coast aspect of it that didn't feel like a Hollywood movie. It's like, well, I can relate to this guy. And then this is a terrifying movie, but it also feels kind of fun. And so all of a sudden I got into Fangoria and I got into figuring out, movie makeup and, looking into all that stuff and the writing and the directing and like, oh, these things are made. There's editing. There's people write screenplays for these things. It's not just people running around pouring blood on each other, and scaring the crap out of me, giving me nightmares. So then it became something where but that was it. I suddenly was having fun with horror instead of being terrified by it. And that changed it. And that really was, I always kind of say Creepshow, it's one of my all-time favorite horror movies, if not my all-time favorite horror movie. And that it was the thing that kind of completely changed it for me. And I still watch Creepshow all the time. And I still wish that there were more horror anthologies. And I wish that kind of comic book, crazy lighting, crazy panels thing was something that more people were doing. I would love to see that. But Creepshow is the straight answer, one-word answer to your questions.
Well, and I love the story of your horror discovery watching Halloween. I feel like if we paid parents to do that, we could just create horror fans.
Create the next
like
wave
in mass. We could
right.
We could manufacture fans to grow the genre.
Right. No, I love gateway stuff. You have your kid, like The Gate, which was Stephen Dorff's first movie, and just like Monster Squad and all these great things in the '80s that were definitely kind of.
You're naming all of Nick's favorite.
Yeah, it's like talking to my. It's like talking to like a doppelganger. I'm like, oh shit.
They're the best. They're the best. And I love that gateway stuff. I love that in the 80s there was this kind of weird confusion about like, okay, well, these are for kids. They're R-rated and they've got boobs and they've got decapitations and people getting skinned alive and stuff, but they're for kids. It's like, well, wait a minute. Like, how is that right? Like, you look at Charles Band's whole filmography and it's like, who is this for? Like Puppet Master? Like, who is this for? Like, it's clearly for kids. But yeah, that's, so it's definitely a weird time. You look at the PG-13s and you look at the Rs and stuff happening it's just a very, very confusing era to grow up in when you had stuff that was clearly not meant for kids, but was being directly targeted at kids and counting on kids going. Friday the 13th movies were, for the most part, for 14-year-olds.
Yep.
And 14-year-olds couldn't get into the theater. So how does that work? Like, what was the success rate? But adults, grown. I remember my parents had complete and utter disdain for Jason and Friday the 13th. Like, they had no interest in going to go see Friday the 13th. I had to beg them to have them go up to the box office and buy me a ticket so I could go in. And it's like, I remember thinking like, well, this is it. And then talking in the schoolyard about it and talking about Michael Myers and talking about Freddy Krueger and being like, well, okay, like, but why are the adults not into this? And it's like, well, because they were for kids. They were for a younger crowd. So yeah, it's all gateway, then it's all gateway in that era.
That's weird. I was reading a book. I can't remember the name of it right now, but it was on the golden age of horror comics. And it was very similar.
Oh yeah.
That where what age they were being pitched to, and then the way adults were getting involved and not involved, like in a weird way. It was
right, totally. And I love that stuff. I love the EC comics. I get all the collections now, all the big hardbound collection.
Being a Creepshow fan, it's hard not to. Like that's like the heroin. You're like, I need more of that.
Yes. No, it's like mainlining it. It's like I don't get enough Creepshow, so I got to find other outlets for my Creepshow addiction.
I know. That's why
plug it in.
That's why with shows like Black Mirror, it's
it's the anthology,
type of show. I'm like, all right, we just need a little bit more of that, a little bit more of that.
Yeah. Oh, I do these things. Earbud Theater is this thing. It's earbudtheater.com. They're scary radio shows, basically. And Earbud, they do sci-fi and they do fantasy type stuff as well. Mm-hmm. But they're basically mine. I've written and directed 4 of them, and I do voice acting in a lot of them as well. And we just did a 5-part serialized thing that was called After the Haunting, that actually the last episode just went up this week. But mine are all totally like segments from horror anthologies that haven't been made. So they're all like, if you put them all together, they would be this fun, but they're all like old scary radio show type horror things.
That's awesome.
And they're so much fun to do, and it's so freeing. And it's like, if I could make a living doing that, I would easily just drop everything else and go do that. It's like the coolest thing, just to create stuff in people's minds. You can freak people out so much worse by putting pictures in their heads than
yeah, for sure.
you know what I mean, than anything you can show them. So, but yeah, they're all totally, if you guys ever go to earbutttheater.com and look up the ones I've done, and they're totally Creepshow segments and Tales from the Dark Side segments, but ones that you've never seen. So
that's awesome.
Go and check those out.
Speaking my language.
Yes.
All right, so let's dive into the writing. I'm really fascinated with this. When you're writing, because you wrote a ton of features, do you try to scare yourself when you're writing?
Yes, absolutely. I do, and I tend to scare myself. I mean, Jackals definitely had some instances where I not only scared myself, but then the people that were closest to me were a little worried about me with some of the stuff that was in it, because it was like, wow, like this is really nasty, like this is really harsh and nasty. But I think that if you can scare yourself, then you've got to. It's funny because they say that if you're writing a comedy and you make yourself laugh, that you're in danger of it not being funny to anybody else. But I think that if you can scare yourself, I think that chances are you're going to scare a hell of a lot of other people. And yeah, again, Jackals was written in 2006, and so it's interesting about kind of seeing it made. And I was heavily involved with the production, and I was there the whole time. I was there for 10 out of the 15 days that it was shot. It was very low budget. That was something where I've evolved since then. So it's like it was interesting to kind of be tinkering with the script that I had written 10 years prior.
Yeah, you were time traveling.
Yeah, you know what I mean? And like, oh yeah, this scene's finally coming to life, because there were scenes, and a lot of stuff had changed over the years, but a lot of stuff hadn't. And there were scenes that I had written, there's I won't spoil it, but there's a scene in the movie involving fire that basically never changed. And it was one of the most effed up things that I'd ever really dreamt up. And seeing it finally kind of realized was terrifying. It was just like, oh God, like what twisted, awful place did I pull that from? So yeah, I definitely try to scare myself. And I think that if you aren't scaring yourself with your writing and you're a horror writer, then you're probably doing it wrong.
Well, speaking of the juxtaposition between like funny and scary, I Jackals is not a funny movie,
no.
But I had to laugh when I realized that the setup was a double intervention, right?
Yes.
Like you've got someone, Justin's basically surrounded, and then they're surrounded.
Yes.
And I thought that was kind of like darkly funny. Is that like intentionally darkly funny, or is that
absolutely
just a product? Okay.
Absolutely. No, I mean, look, there are a couple. I mean, there are like 2 funny moments in the movie. I think maybe 2, right?
One per hour.
One per hour. And I mean, it definitely it's grim. I mean, it's grim, and then it stays grim, and then it ends grim. And I think I've kind of lightened up with my old age a little bit, but as I've gotten older. But no, that whole thing was, you had the cult deprogramming, which is something that's outmoded, and you had the satanic cult stuff, which again, they're not satanic necessarily. They were in the original script. But they got changed into kind of a nebulous, Anubis-based kind of vague thing. But we talked about that a lot. But it was definitely something where back in the 70s and the 80s, there was this whole deprogramming, tactic that was, you would hire these dudes that I refer to as kind of like psychologist bounty hunters, who would, and they were just these tough guys. You didn't have credentials or anything. You didn't know what the hell, they weren't accredited. You just found them, or they found you, and you would kind of task them with pulling your son or daughter or husband or whatever out of a cult. And then you would have to, tie people to a chair and try to break them out of the brainwashing. And that was my way into doing kind of a satanic ritual abuse movie, because if you just did a satanic ritual abuse movie, it would be banned in every country in the world and get an NC-17, and there'd be no way to actually tell that story. And so I kept trying to figure out, how do I tell the story? Because when I was growing up, it was such a hysteria about satanic cults. And I was like, well, why have we not seen a movie about that? We've had plenty of satanic cult movies since I wrote the damn thing, but not, I still... But at the time, there were very, very, very few. And so the cult deprogramming thing kind of came along as an idea, and it was like, oh, wait, this is my way in. But, so that once I figured out the culty programming, it was like, okay, so the culty programmer kidnaps the kid. They bring the kid to the cabin in the woods, tie him to a chair, and then the cult shows up. And to me, that was always, whenever I would pitch it, I would say that. And everybody would lean forward in their chair. And it's like, okay, well, then this is a good idea. This is a great idea. This is something that I need to hold on to. And as I said before we started recording, I wrote the script 10 years ago, and it never went away. Like, it was somebody was always trying to make it. Starting with Toby Hooper. Toby Hooper was initially attached to, he was the first person attached to direct.
Oh, cool.
And we just had, over the years, different directors and producers that kind of came and went, and for whatever reason, things would fall apart, as they always do. And it would just kind of go back onto the shelf, and then within a couple of months, somebody else would call and say, hey, what's going on with Jackals? And I'd say, well, nothing right now, and you want to take a look at it? And the next thing I know, there would be another director attached, or there'd be, it'd be off to the races again, and it would seem like it was going to happen. And other scripts I've written haven't had that kind of luck. Like, they get written, you send them out, there's a little bit of interest. Every now and then somebody calls about them, but for the most part, they just kind of die out, they fizzle out. But I've had 3 or 4 that don't die out, where it's just like that people keep calling and people keep checking in on it, and people keep asking if they can take it to a financier, if they can take it to their boss at the studio or whatever. And Jackals was one of them. And it's just one of those where you kind of get a sense over time, like, oh, well, this is probably going to get made, which is an interesting kind of like, it's the different, because when you haven't had anything produced, that starts to feel delusional after a while. You start to feel like you're some sort of a schizophrenic or something, where you're just convincing yourself that insanity is real. Like, well, obviously I'm going to be a successful screenwriter. This is going to get made into a movie someday. And it's like, yeah, there's nothing indicating that, dude. Like, you haven't had anything made. And so with Jackals, it just kind of, it was, I like to say that in this town, you can die from encouragement. And I was constantly getting validation about Jackals. It's like, well, no, this is good. Like, here, this guy wants to make it, and now this guy wants to make it, and this person wants to hire you to write something because they read it. So that kind of stuff just kept happening, and eventually, it got made, thank God. But it really was something where it was that concept where it just all fell into place in my head once I had the culty programmer. And you're right, like, it is something where, they've got him trapped, and then they have them trapped. And then if you want to take it a step further, their worst enemy, their biggest problem is him.
Mm-hmm. Well, I was going to say, I love the scenario of the immobilized menace.
Right.
I think that's just such a cool.
Me too.
And it's very minimal, and it doesn't. I'm sure it didn't give the actor a lot to work with, so he did an amazing job.
He's great,
because you can't. You're so limited from that scenario.
Yeah, Ben Sullivan, he's so great. He was tied to that goddamn chair for so long, and he would just give up on the idea of even going to the bathroom at certain points. Like, no, it's just not going to happen. I know it's not going to happen. So let's just go. Like, and it was just, well, do you want? Because untying him and retying him was such a big pain in the ass, because you see how tight, and it had to be consistent.
The continuity,
yeah, sure. For continuity, and so that poor guy, but he was so good, and he could turn it on and off like a switch. Like, he's such a good actor, but he wasn't Mr. Method Guy. He was not someone that was like scary that you didn't want to be around. He was fun and telling jokes and telling stories and singing songs while they were, he's tied to that damn chair, and there's gaffers and lighting guys and stuff are going around, and they're doing their thing, and everybody's talking, and they're doing measurements and all this shit, and he's just kind of sitting there. And then they would say action, and he would get menacing, and it would just be like that, just this instant change. And
Good for him. That's awesome.
They cut, and he would smile and crack a joke, and everything would be light again, and it was amazing. But he was so, I would love to work with him again, and we haven't. He's Canadian, so he's not out here. So like, I haven't been able to like go out and get a beer with him or anything. But every time he says he's coming to town, it's like, okay, if he's ever in town, it's like, we're gonna go out and get a beer. He was so fun and so cool to work with, and such a revelation.
He's not going to be fun at the bar unless you tie him to the stool.
You know that, right? It's like, that's what brings out his
No,
fun
exactly. He was great, and he was also somebody when they were auditioning actors. I tell the story in the commentary on the Blu-ray that Stephen Dorff and Jonathan Scheck and Deborah Kara Unger were offers. You go to them and you say, would you like to play this role? But the younger characters were auditions. So I was getting Dropboxed videos of auditions, you know, and he, you know, Kevin would say, I like these 3 or 4 people. What do you think? And what are your notes and this and that? And so, you know, there were Samantha's to look at and there were Campbell's to look at. And then I got this email one day that said, we found Justin. And I was like, okay. And it was like, I'm not going to get to see 5 or 6 Justins or 10 Justins. Like, nope, we found him. And they sent me his audition tape, which was a self-tape. It was something that he did in Canada.
Okay.
And I opened it and watched it. And in all caps, I wrote back, hire him, grab him now. Like, no question that he was the guy. And it was just one of those moments where it was like, yep. And I was so glad that he wasn't a flake or a wacko or difficult to work with or anything. He was a
No, he's just Canadian.
He's just Canadian. He's just Canadian, but he's so good in the movie. And yeah, the poor guy just.
An actor's life is so weird. I'm trying to picture him like tying himself to a chair in Canada to do a tape for you.
Straight.
Did he tie himself down and realize he forgot to hit
Record one time.
Oh, no, that's the people who didn't get cast.
Yeah,
Dozens of them did that.
Their takes never made it.
While we're talking about the cultist, I'm curious. Did you have in your head writing it it sounds like a really organic process, so it might have changed, but a backstory for the cultists? Because they're strategically, they stand toe to toe with an ex-Marine.
Mm-hmm,
right?
mm-hmm.
So I was wondering while I was watching it, like what was in the writer's head about their skill set going into
Well, so that was, again, it did evolve over the years. It was definitely different when I initially wrote it, but Kevin Greuter and I, the director, we had a lot of discussions and a lot of private kind of, you know, writing that wasn't writing that was just for him and me to have kind of a documented backstory for the cult and the cult leader and what their deal was. And a lot of it has to do with ex-cons and, you know, kind of a motorcycle gang mentality. It was definitely something that we talked about at length. But one of the things that we didn't want to do as far as the movie was concerned was we didn't want any of it on screen. Like, we didn't want anybody, because we thought it would be scarier. You know, it's one of those things where it's just as soon as you start giving away what the thing is, what the backstory is, or what the origin is, or, you know, how they got this way, then it completely demystifies it.
Yep.
And it's funny because there have been some reviews that have said, like, well, they don't even bother telling you what the cult is or what their belief system is or anything like that. It's like, well, why would I do that? Like, that wouldn't be scary.
Those are the same fans who hate Halloween 6.
Yeah. That's the thing, you know. And so I don't get that at all. So my whole thing, but we definitely did talk about what the cults. Not only like what their belief system was, but what their kind of goals were as individuals, and what the cult leaders' whole kind of and some of it's in there. There's a little bit. There used to be more of it, but like we cut some of it. But Jimmy, kind of the Stephen Dorff's character, gives you some of the background. But it definitely was something that had a lot more to do with. Think of it more as like a militarized motorcycle gang with a lot of people that spent a lot of time in prison.
That's exactly what I was thinking, but not in those words. That's awesome. That's the vibe. That's really cool.
That's definitely where we're going with it.
And the masks are just goddamn amazing.
So they're cool.
What was the design like?
I didn't really have. I mean, we discussed that, but that evolved. That was something in my original scripts. It was very kind of Omega Man. It was very kind of race.
Cool.
They were kind of robe wearing guys with black holes where the faces should be, and they were just going to stand there, kind of Carpenter style, in these robes. But immediately, like out of the gate, both Kevin and Tommy Alastra, the producer, were like, that might be a little hokey. Let's figure out a way to make them scarier. And so once Kevin and I started talking about what the cult was into, and Anubis, and Egyptian stuff, the ancient Egyptian stuff, it just kind of started to kind of present itself as like, well, okay, if they maybe, and we never call them jackals in the movie, but it was one of these things where it's like, well, let's move into a jackals area, and the masks are supposed to represent jackal shapes, jackal faces. And then Anubis being the cult leader as far as the big mask goes.
Yeah, I want to thank you for bringing out childhood nightmares.
We had like
Egypt style some furniture when I grew
Oh,
up.
really?
There was like this weird lamp that had Anubis on it, and it was terrifying. And then I fire this movie up. I'm like, I haven't seen this in a movie before.
Great.
It was definitely it was interesting because I remember we even talked about doing kind of very animal masks in a Wicker Man kind of way. And so it was going to be much more. We initially, like the first phase during pre-production when we were designing masks, there was definitely more of because the one thing that kind of stuck was what is referred to in the movie as Fox Girl.
Yep.
And Fox Girl has kind of a fox face. Mm-hmm. And so that kind of stuck because we had already started on the animal mask thing, and then the kind of Jackals thing really kind of took over. And so it was like, well, Fox Girl really should stay Fox Girl. Like that should probably stay that way. So mm-hmm. It's like the one kind of thing that you can see. There's still kind of evidence of the animal version, the Wicker Man version. Because once we moved away from the robed, hooded cultists, I was like, well, one of the creepiest things to me for a cult was the Wicker Man was all those ceremonial, celebratory masks that everybody's wearing, and how creepy it is, and how unnerving it is. And I was like, let's do something like that. And so we watched the movie, and everybody was like, yeah, that's really creepy and unnerving. And we started moving in that direction. But at some point, there was a discussion about making them more literal jackals, which was not the original title of the movie. So like that whole thing also kind of came along with it, with this iteration of it. It was originally called Sacrilege. And so, like I said, it was much more satanic, and it evolved into kind of the Jackals.
That's cool.
What were some of the influences for the films? There's a lot of cult stuff. So was there any like real life cult stories that you saw and thought, oh shit, I gotta?
Yeah, I mean, definitely a lot of, like I said, a lot of the satanic ritual abuse cult stories were, and again, unproven, unsubstantiated, but a lot of the kind of planted memory stuff that was written about and documented was really, really fascinating and really disturbing. And like a lot of it came out of that. There used to be a lot more discussion about the kinds of things that they were up to that were kind of taken from some of the witness accounts, of the satanic ritual stuff. As far as the influences go, though, honestly, I mean, some of them, it's almost kind of like blatant in its own kind of, you've got like Assault on Precinct 13 and Night of the Living Dead and Straw Dogs, and Hills Have Eyes, and I always talk about one of the weirder unconscious influences was this movie called The Island with Michael Caine. It was strange. It was one of these things where I didn't realize until Scream Factory, ironically enough, put out the disc in 2013. They put out a Blu-ray of it, and I hadn't seen it since I'd seen it on cable when I was a kid. But The Island is about a island of pirates who are literal pirates. They live on an island away from all technology and modern niceties, and they are pirates, and they're like buccaneers. And so they capture Michael Caine and his son, whose name is Justin, and brainwash him and turn him against his father. And they give him a new name and everything. And this is all shit that, honestly, I'd written the script years before I rewatched The Island. I had forgotten completely about The Island. It was one of those like, whoa, what did I do? Like, how much of it? Thankfully, like, it's not, there are buccaneers and it's all about like, island and stuff. So it's very different. But like, Jesus, like I really had forgotten. It was one of those things where I had absorbed it and didn't know, and then it came out in my own way, and I didn't realize how much of that particular movie. But when you look at kind of the obvious stuff, and then obviously there's the book, Jack Ketchum, Off Season. It was huge, obvious influence. I mean, you look at a lot of the Siege stuff, and those kinds of movies, Craven and Carpenter and those guys, the influence is kind of, I would be a more, George Romero, it would be goofy for me to deny that I was influenced by those guys. And I'm touches of Toby as well. That's an interesting thing, was Toby Hooper was the first guy attached to direct. And honestly, it had a lot more kind of Toby elements like Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2, type elements and Eaten Alive type elements initially. And a lot of that stuff kind of over the years had gotten kind of filtered out, and with Toby leaving the project, it also, that stuff all went. But yeah, the influences are all the horror movies all the siege horror movies that I love, and then Race with the Devil and a lot of the satanic stuff from the 70s, Devil's Reign, Brotherhood of Satan, that kind of stuff. Because those movies I love all that stuff. And I again just didn't feel like there was stuff in the 70s when you had that was hot, like Satanism was this hot topic because of movies. Honestly, it was things like The Exorcist and The Omen, and Rosemary's Baby that made Satanism this really hot thing in the 70s. But in the 80s and into the 90s, we had all this hysteria that was almost like a reaction to the interest, like as though the interest had blossomed into these groups that were out there doing this stuff. So it's a lot of influences. A lot of it is just my brain, and then just the family drama, just wanting to kind of, take a really serious kind of family drama and a deprogramming drama. I guess the other influences that I should mention would be, in the early 80s, there were also cult deprogramming movies. The biggest one for me was this really obscure, and I don't know why it's obscure, but this movie called Split Image. And Split Image was made in 1982, and it's directed by Ted Kochev, who directed First Blood. And Brian Dennehy plays the father. James Woods plays the deprogrammer. Karen Allen from Raiders of the Lost Ark is in it. Peter Fonda plays the cult leader. But it's a drama. It's a cult deprogramming drama where there is a promising young guy he's like an Olympic hopeful gymnastics, and he gets drawn into a cult, and the family can't get him back, and they hire James Woods. And then 1982, Videodrome era James Woods, to kidnap him out of the cult, and they try to deprogram him. And it's a drama. There's like slight horror elements that are based around the kid being really freaky and really freaked out, but it's not a horror movie. So it was just one of these things where when I started doing the deprogramming direction, I went back and watched that. And there's always one that I forget to mention, and I'm going to look up right now, that was another deprogramming movie, and I can't think of what it's called, but it was something. There were like two serious cult deprogramming dramas in the 80s that made a big, impact.
That's fascinating to me because
it's like Split Image, when you name that cast, that sounds like it has a chance to be a really good movie.
I know, and it is. Right? It's actually a really good movie, and I have no idea why people don't know about it. I saw it on
Well, the genre died. It's like if you wouldn't wanted to invest stock in satanic
Right. The thing with Split Image too is that it's like a peace and love hippy dippy cult. It's like I won't disparage any active religions by saying, oh, it was this kind of thing, but it was a very much a just surrender all of your possessions and take on a new name, and starve yourself, and why do you need these things, and all this hippy dippy stuff. So it was very much. It wasn't no one had ever done the satanic version. Right. You had Devil's Reign and Race with the Devil and those kinds of movies, and then you had the cult deprogramming movies, but never the twain shall meet.
Right.
So that was the thing. It just seemed like it was something to really kind of put together. And like I said, the reaction to putting it together was very strong. Industry-wise, people really responded to it. It just took 10 years to get it made.
So this might be an unanswerable question, but as the writer of the movie, when the audience walks out of the theater, what do you hope that they would feel or think walking out of it?
Wow, that's a good question. It might be unanswerable. As you said, I guess
not an interpretation of it. Just
no. I mean, what would I want them to? I would want them to be a little bit traumatized. Nice. I think that what's interesting about it being set specifically in the 80s, which was dictated by the elements being used, is that at the same time, it's also a very 70s movie. Mm-hmm. In my opinion, I mean, as far as all of the influences and all of the kind of the way it starts and the attitudes of the characters and the kind of bleak, grim kind of progression of it, to me, feels more 70s than any other era. You would have movies that would kind of end the way that Jackals ends in the 70s. And I think you're seeing a resurgence of that kind of stuff now. I'm you know, I'm glad that we got away with being allowed to make a movie that has that bleak of an ending. But I think that it's like, I also shouldn't be like taking credit as like, hey, no movies have bleak endings. Like plenty of movies today have bleak endings. You know, I love, I was talking about Black Coat's Daughter before we started recording. And I mean, I love that movie. I love it so much.
Such a good movie.
But it, you know, again, like you come away from that movie feeling like you've watched your family being massacred. Like, I mean, there's no, you know, it's a traumatic, you know, traumatizing movie.
Sure.
And so I guess that was really it. It was like, I like horror movies that leave you kind of shaken up.
See, this wasn't a horror movie, but I love this experience where, you know, I'm in a theater and it's packed, and then we were watching Gone Girl, and when the movie ended, no one moved. Right? It looked like everyone had got punched in the gut.
Yes.
And that's the kind. I imagine that's like a very satisfying thing to pull off.
Yes.
As a filmmaker, if you're going for it.
And I had the same feeling. I had the same feeling about Gone Girl. I thought Gone Girl was great. But yeah, it's definitely one of those, you know, or, you know, what's interesting to bring up in the same vein, another non-horror movie, but a cult movie is Marcy May Marlene.
Wow. Don't know that.
Yeah. Oh, you should see it. It's great. It's a Fox movie from a couple of years ago with, oh God, I can't think of her name. This is terrible. But it's a really solid, scary drama that is about cults, about a cult member who kind of escapes or is extricated from a cult. But that movie leaves you just shaken. Like, you don't know what to even think about what the future is going to be like for the characters, much less for what you're going to, like, you go home feeling very troubled, you know, and feeling very disturbed. And I think that was what I wanted out of it. And so I hope that that's what people get. I remember the Chelsea Ricketts, who plays Samantha, when she saw it the first time. I saw her afterwards, and she had tears in her eyes, and she was still kind of recovering. And I said, "Are you okay?" And she was just like, I don't know. Like, I don't know if I'm okay. Like, and she was really disturbed by it. And I think it was like, you know, her moment at the end of the movie, and like where it goes, and just how the movie was left. Like, she was really, really disturbed by it. And I mean, she's great. We worked together. She was in one of my Earbud Theater episodes. We're really, really good friends at this point, but she was really shaken by it. And she's not a horror movie person. She's not someone that, the irony being that now she's doing horror movies. She went from she went from Jackals to Dan Farron's new Amityville Murders.
Oh, cool.
The DeFeo thing.
Yep.
So she's playing Butch DeFeo's sister in that. But
She's
yeah,
gonna be in tears again.
yeah. Well, it was so funny. I was talking to her recently, and I was The Thing. John Carpenter's The Thing came up in a conversation that she was part of, and she was like, "Oh, I've never seen that." And I was like, "Oh my God, we've so much work to do."
You totally do.
But she's not a horror movie person, and so that's the thing. And I've talked to other people, you know, that have seen it that are not horror movie people, that were just like, "Wow, like that really disturbed me."
I love her
Quote. I feel like if I was making movies, that would be the quote I would want on my poster. It would be, "I just watched this and I don't know if I'm okay."
I don't know if I'm okay, right? You know, and that's
I can't answer the question. If I'm okay.
And obviously, I mean, there was a lot more, you know, goals in the movie. There were a lot more things to try to accomplish. But I think at the end of the day, like when it cuts to black, I hope that you're kind of shocked, you know, that's where we're leaving you, and that's all there is. You know?
Well, speaking of endings, this is something we've seen talked about in the group quite a bit, and I'm curious as a filmmaker, how do you feel about spoilers nowadays, especially with the internet and all that stuff?
Do you think it
takes a whole lot away, or you know, where do you land on that one?
You know, it used to bother me more than it does. I think that we have reached a stage with spoilers where people not only expect them, but now there's this weird kind of secondary wave of spoilers where people won't be as interested to see something if they don't have a little bit more foreknowledge. Like, I would much rather see something blind. I would much rather go in cold and have absolutely no idea what I was getting.
Sure.
If you could market it in such a way that got me interested enough, then I would go. And that's me, but I'm more old school. But I am finding now that the trick now, I mean, now you have these trailers that actually on YouTube where they have like the money shot from the trailer comes first and as like a teaser of the trailer you're about to watch.
Wow.
So even the trailers are being spoiled before you're watching the trailer. So, I mean, I am, part of me would much rather people go in blind and go in cold and just watch something and be, kind of experience it. But I know that as a reality of the industry and of the business and of the zeitgeist and the culture right now, that people are more inclined to want to know as much as they can before they see it. I don't know why. I want to experience it. I want to, and filmmakers make things. I don't know any filmmaker that makes stuff so that they can have the marketing department spoil something in a trailer and ruin the moment in the movie. Like, I don't know anybody that does that.
It's amazing.
You know what I mean?
They're spoiling trailers. We've reached spoiler inception.
Right.
Literally, where they're going to pay people to sit in the seat next to you in the theater, tell you what you're about to see.
But it is a strange phenomenon. I don't really get it. What's interesting to me, and I've had this kind of argument with a lot of the horror crowd that I'm friendly with in LA, is horror trailers used to be way more spoilery than they are even now. Like, you watch the trailer for Black Christmas, it's 3 minutes long and it shows the entire ending of the movie.
Oh, wow.
And you watch a lot of those old trailers from the 70s or the 60s, and like they're all kind of the third act in like very abbreviated form. And so it's, Halloween, like a lot of the Halloween trailer is just the third act. They don't have Michael falling out of the window and the body being gone or anything like that. But I mean, it's her racing across the street and banging on the doors and all that stuff like that. All the big suspense beats of the third act of Halloween are in the trailer.
Wow.
And that was just the way. So it's interesting. It's kind of this thing where there's like this forgetfulness on the part of fans my age and fans like me, where we're like, oh, they're showing too much. And then there's this like, no, you go back, you don't realize, because you know the movie so well when you're watching the trailer, that like there was so much being given away. So I am on the fence about it, but I understand that it's something that is kind of necessary. And there was nothing in the trailer. I remember the trailer for Jackals, talking to Kevin Greutert about it, because they put those things together. Mm-hmm. You can make, not me, but like Kevin would be able to at least kind of interject some stuff. But those are basically made by the studio. In this case, I think it was Scream Factory made the trailer. Scream Factory, who are, by the way, some of my favorite people in the world, and I get stuff. I go over there once a month to get stuff for horror trivia. Like, I have I've had a great relationship with them for years. So this was like a dream come true.
They're amazing. They're great.
They're so great, and they love their fans, and they love horror movies. Like, they're not just a company that is out for a buck. And
no, you can tell. You can even tell by how they post and the tone.
Oh God, and the artwork and all that stuff. So I mean, it was just a dream, and so they put their trailers together. And I remember Kevin having like a bit of a hesitation about a spoiler in one of the trailers, but other than, I think, and I kind of told him, I was like, no one's in context. No one's really going to know that that's a spoiler. Right. You know what I mean? Like, no one's going to feel that that's a spoiler. Like, when they see the movie, they'll be like, oh, I know what's going to happen to that guy. But to me, it was like, no, it's fine. So I didn't feel like there was much. The one thing I remember when they started doing was clips. They started putting up clips. And that was bothering me more, because they were like, minute long. They were like minute and a half or minute long scenes from the movie. And I was like, oh, I don't want people seeing that. Like, that was bothering me more. But that's what they do. But that's what they do. And the closer the movie comes out, whether it's on VOD or theatrical or whatever, you start seeing clips, and they'll have these full blown scenes on the internet.
Completely out of context.
Yeah. And then sometimes they're edited. Sometimes sometimes they take out key things, or they don't, there's a ratings issue or something, because they're supposed to be kind of general.
Why would they even do that? Oh, that's why they do it. I'd be so mad. I'm gonna look up a Jackals clip, and it's like Humphrey Bogart's gonna show up in the movie.
I remember that they posted a clip, and it's a cool clip, and it was the first time I'd seen the clip. I had seen with the score. I remember I'd seen a version of it with the temp score, but I hadn't seen it final. And it was it's Stephen Dorff outside with the gun, looking for Fox Girl.
Okay.
And I remember and it played for quite a while. Finally, it kind of cut, but I was like, and I was relieved, but I was like, Jesus, like, this is a really key moment in the movie. I don't know if I want people seeing it. But then I realized, and I talked to them, and they were just like, A, they're just really approachable, and you can just call them up and ask them stuff. And they were like, look, people want to see stuff to get them excited about the movie. Like, don't worry about the impact it's going to have on some hypothetical person's enjoyment of it, because most people, it's going to actually have the opposite effect. They're going to want to see it because they saw that.
That's
awesome.
Or they're not going to want to have it spoiled and they won't watch it.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's the thing.
As long as they're getting in front of eyeballs.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah, and that's the thing. I think,
that's
and nowadays you have a choice whether or not you want to watch, stuff that spoils things. I know people that once they kind of get a sense that a movie is coming out, that they are like, hey, I'm ignoring trailers.
Yep.
And that's something that they can choose to do, and their tickets are already sold. They don't need to see more.
Yeah, you're literally like unfollowing people on social media for a week until.
Yeah.
It's crazy the maneuvers
Totally.
you have to do. That's awesome. Well, do you have any projects coming up you want to mention or talk about?
Well, like I said, the Earbud Theater, earbudtheater.com is something that I am a big part of. They are pod plays, so they're audio dramas. We bring in professional actors, and we have Hollywood people doing all the sound design and the music, and they're very, very slick, well done stories. I have written and directed and acted in 4 of them, but I do a lot of voice acting for them. But we just posted the final episode of a 5-part serialized drama called After the Haunting, and it's almost like a Poltergeist sequel. It was kind of like what would happen if you were in Cuesta Verde on the day after the Freeling house imploded.
Nice.
So it's kind of like taking that and going with it. But it's got some kind of Hellraiser stuff in it, and some very kind of, it's a fun one. I didn't write it or direct it. Casey Wolf did, but I'm really proud of it. And then, I've just optioned some stuff and something I wrote 5 years ago as opposed to 10 years ago. Just got optioned, and it's looking like we've got a producer attached now, and that's coming along. It's on IMDb,
cool.
so people can look it up. It's the thing called Rotten Apples.
Sweet.
And actually, there's a feature script that's based on one of my Earbud Theater episodes that went out and is getting a lot of interest right now. So that's looking very, very promising.
Nice.
And so just constantly writing stuff and developing stuff and taking meetings and trying to get stuff going. It's interesting. It's definitely been a change. Jackals coming out has definitely had an impact where now there's a different, all the years of trying to get stuff going before Jackals, I was always the unproduced guy. And, building a good reputation and having good material out there and constantly getting meetings and constantly being on people's lists, on people's radars was great, but it wasn't getting anywhere. It wasn't getting me really anywhere other than that, at least from my experience. But now that Jackals has come out, it's definitely kind of like, thankfully, kind of tipped that over into people finally kind of calling and asking and, wanting to work with me, which is great. So
Good.
Yeah.
And deserved. People who know horror should be
Thank you.
moving up.
Now they got to work through your back catalog. Like,
Yeah, exactly.
All right, awesome. Well, everyone check out Jackals. Follow them on Facebook. Check out the movie.
Yes.
And do you want? Is there anywhere they connect with you personally? Or
I'm on Twitter. I think it's just Jared Rivet 1. It's boring. I think that was what was available when I looked at Twitter. Jackals, I think it's Jackals Movie, and on Twitter, and it's also there's a Facebook. Jackals is a Facebook page. They have a contest going on right now, actually, to win a Jackals mask, a screen-used Jackals mask.
Nice.
Yeah, I don't have one, so I'm a little bit.
you got to enter the
I have
contest.
some resentment. I have to enter the freaking contest so I can win a goddamn Jackals mask. So go there for that, and then it's on everything. It's on. It's out on Blu-ray. You can get it at Best Buy and Walmart and Amazon. It's on VOD. It's on. I think you can rent it on Amazon Prime. Just check it out and. Know that it was a very, very long journey to getting that sucker made.
Awesome. It is so fun to talk to you, man.
Thanks, man.
Congrats on the movie and everything else, and happy October.
Happy October to you guys. Thank you for doing this. Thank you very much for having me on.